Hello, my name is Mario Villalta. I'm Director of IT at Intel at Intel Corporation. First of all, I just want to start with a big thank you to our friends of Powerland in Canada for the invite to this important event in the midst of a huge, unprecedented times. Many times over the last 5 to 6 months, uh, I had been asked, how is it that Intel IT and Intel in general had been able to face uh, massive operations around the world uh, with virtual no interruption, uh, given the complexity of our supply chain, the diverse and diversified nature of our product portfolio and locations around the world. Certainly, it has been a big challenge, a monumental challenge, actually, I should say. But fortunately, we feel very proud 5 6 months into this crisis that we had been able to maintain uh, our operation, I would say close to 100% when we compare it to pre-COVID times. So with that, I would like to use this opportunity to share some of the lessons that we have learned over this time at Intel and specifically at Intel IT eh, in order to make this happen. For that purpose, I am going to be using the next 40 to 45 minutes to go through some slides with the intent to organize the discussion into what we believe are the most relevant aspects of the overall strategy and tactics that we had put in place over the years and over the last 5 to 6 months in order to make it a success. Um, I many times I've been asked as well, what has changed? What changes did we had to face in order to approach this crisis? And I would say that many things have changed. Probably everything has changed from a tactical standpoint. But from a strategic viewpoint, I would say that there hasn't been actually much changes to our strategy. Many of the things that had enabled us to face this crisis with success had been part of a long journey on which we had been embarked over the last at least 2 decades. So I think that it's important to mention because uh, one of the key things that any organization, in my opinion, needs to be aware of is that there should be some foundational capabilities already in place eh, to make it possible that when the crisis hit, you would be able to face it successfully and with minimal disruption to the business operations. So, again, from a tactical point of view, we had been uh, forced to change some of our business processes, things that in the past used to take probably months. Now we are doing it and we have done it in a matter of weeks or days. Uh, Things that normally we considered well prepared to face a worst case scenario ended up being insufficient, and we had to react and put in place the actions to continue operating. But again, thanks to those foundational capabilities and those strategies that we had been pursuing over the years, uh, I I would say that we have been able to recognize to face and resolve many of those challenges without any or minimal disruption to the business. So with that said, again, let me thank again our friends from Powerland for this opportunity. And another thing I want to mention before I get into the details of the next 40 minutes is that in the program that I'm responsible for in North America, IT at Intel, actually our objective is to share with our customers, partners, industry in general, the best practices that we had been uh, implementing at Intel IT. In other words, how is it that Intel Corporation does its own IT? And we feel that having this type of conversations, meaning IT to IT type of conversations, is incredibly valuable for our customers and for ourselves as we learn a lot from these conversations, from this engagement. So from now on, from the offset, I just want to um, invite uh, our friends and customers and industry in general to reach out to IT at Intel regarding any questions or follow-up clarifications that you might feel appropriate for your own reality, for your own organization. So let me first share a, a presentation that I uh, put together for today with the intent of going through what I would say are the key uh, elements of being able to tackle the COVID situation in our company and actually in any company. So first of all, I should start saying that at Intel, our purpose, our North Star, our mission is really to create world-changing technology to enrich the lives of every person on Earth. And saying that is especially meaningful in times like this, where disruption had hit every organization, every nation, every family, every business, every person around the world. And we strongly believe at Intel that with our technology, we had been able to help the world keep running. And part of achieving that um, ambitious goal actually is having this type of conversations like what we are talking today regarding what can we share with other organizations with regards to managing this crisis. So a little bit of our environment to set the stage in terms of what is it that we're talking about when we say that we have a complex or large scale environment that we need to manage. Intel is a corporation, large global corporation with more than 110,000 employees around the world. Actually, there are more than 150,000 employees if we count indirect workers that daily keep our organization running. This huge amount of employees, contractors, and in general people that make Intel what it is spread across 147 Intel sites in 56 countries around the world. And just the group of IT, of information technology, is made up of more than 5,000 employees spread across 22 campuses or sites around the world. So as you can imagine, just that in itself is a mega challenge for our company. How do you keep connected and engaged and productive 150,000 employees around the world in many different time zones with different types of job responsibilities and with a workforce, with an IT workforce of 5,000 employees, which itself is spread across the world. So with that, some of the numbers that I'm sharing on this slide, you can see, you can have an idea of the number of client devices or managed devices that we run, more than 200,000 client devices. And when I say client devices, I mean mobile PCs in different in different form factors, like ultrabooks, like laptops, like iPads, eh, more than 58,000 smartphones, and more than 7,500 desktops is basically the size of our fleet of our when we say our PC client fleet at Intel, we really mean any of those form factors, which together are north of 200,000 devices that we manage 24 by 7 every single day of the year. Now, in the middle of the chart, you can see some of the trends that we had seen in terms of demand for infrastructure resources at Intel IT over the last 3 years, 2018, and 2019. And one thing that it's pretty evident from this chart is that the pace of growth is really aggressive. What we are seeing is that in terms of storage growth, number of servers, number of network ports required to run our operation is around 30, 35, 40% annual growth. And at the same time, when you compare that with the IT spending that we have at Intel Corporation, you can see that our budget is flat to down to slightly down over the last 3 years. And I wanted to start with this because I'm sure that virtually all organization is sharing pretty much the same challenge. In other words, the challenge of doing more with less, the challenge of an aggressive compounded annual growth along with a flat to down budget scenario. So that in itself is a second challenge. The first one was the scale that I was talking about of running a global diverse company. The second one is really how do you support um, ever growing demand on your storage server and network infrastructure with a flat to down year over year budget. So these calls for innovation, the only way that you can handle that any organization can handle with success, that disparity between these two forces is really through innovation. In other words, how do we get smarter in using our dollars to fund more productivity, to fund new initiatives that will bring to the top and bottom line of the company so that we can be more effective and efficient with pretty much the same dollars of previous years. This requires, in many cases, dramatic changes in strategy. We cannot expect to continue operating under the same paradigms that we had been operating on for the last 5, 10, 15 years. The current times are really unprecedented. We don't know how much time the current crisis will last, but for sure this is not going to be the last. And if there's one thing that comes out clear from all this experience, is that we need to take hard decisions. We need to change paradigms, and we need to position the company uh, for for this future, for this unforeseeable future that we have in front of us. Today, we say at Intel that there aren't really IT projects anymore. What we have is business projects. And in order to be successful in delivering to those business projects, there is no way to do that without an IT operation of excellence. And the only way that you can excel at IT is through innovation and really making sure that that you are being fast, deploying the latest technologies in the smartest possible way. So with that, let me get to the next slide and try to summarize what we believe at Intel are the key cornerstones or the key pillars to build resilience in an organization in order to successfully navigate these waters. So the first thing is the implementation, the operation of a leadership response team, the LRT, as we call it, the leadership response team, is a team that was not actually formed for COVID itself. This is a team that it's ongoing. It's been there for a long, long time, for the last 15, 20 years, and it's the same one that had been responsible for our um, reaction to other crises that we had faced over the last 15, 20 years, not only those related to SARS, but also those related to earthquakes, natural disasters that our company had suffered in different parts of the world. So that's probably the first thing that I would say is a key takeaway, that every organization, regardless of its size, must have an executive leadership response team. This is not a job of IT only, or this is not just a responsibility of a given division or department in the organization. This requires the committed and wise involvement of the highest executive levels of the organization, so that it has representation from all the different um, key stakeholders within the company. Again, this is not just an IT problem. This is not just a supply chain problem. This is not just a manufacturing problem. This is a company, an industry problem. And in order to be able to address it, with responsibility and efficiency, we need the involvement at the highest level of the organization. The second thing that it's absolutely essential in any organization, and again, not necessarily this applies only to global companies. This is equally applicable to a small medium business. Is the can-do mindset. Is it is very important that we all approach these kind of situations with a can-do mindset. By that I mean when we are faced with challenges, really our position is how do we make this work? Not what are the reasons to explain why we cannot do this. So, and this might sound maybe a bit obvious, but when the crisis hit and when the big challenge come, eh, as we all have learned, um, the abundance of excuses and arguments and reasons why something could not be done uh, come from every direction. So we need to make sure that when we are faced with these type of challenges, we approach them with a can-do attitude, thinking on how we are going to make this happen, rather than what are the reasons why we can do it. This was particularly important in many different instances over the last 5, 6 months when we were used to take, 3 months, 4 months to do a specific process or to stage or procure servers. And suddenly we found ourselves that we needed to do those things by stage, configure, and release and put in production Skype servers, for instance, in a matter of hours or a few days. Obviously, the first reaction is we cannot do this. Well, again, can do tells us, don't tell me why we cannot do it. Tell me how is it that we're going to do it. So those two things are essential, and that's why I chose them to start this conversation. Leadership response team, the commitment, involvement at the highest level, and number two, getting into this with a positive, optimistic, can-do type of attitude. And then we get into the next four pillars of this effort. First of all, we need to acknowledge, recognize that this is a mobile world. So mobility is here to stay. Many organizations already are um, in this fully embrace this trend and have a very high percentage mix of laptops to desktops, but some other organizations are lagging a bit behind and still have a high percentage of um, desktops or fixed workstations that force employees to work from a specific physical place. And that's something that each company needs to assess according to its own reality, according to its own policies, according to competition trends, pressures, and also organizations, not necessarily in the private sector, but even public organizations need to reevaluate how feasible, how relevant their current operating model is in this new mobile world. The third aspect that I think it is important that we pay pay close attention to is the absolute necessity, the indispensable importance that needs to be given to building a robust, resilient network. And when I say network, I'm not talking just of the internal network of the company, but also the wide area network. And how is it that we are being exposed and to the threats that every day we are seeing coming from multiple angles. I'm talking specifically about the information security threats. So that's a key area of concern, and obviously the resiliency and the capacity of the network that without which we wouldn't be able to operate. The next one is to the next item that it's key is to make sure that we have a multi-cloud ready enterprise, a multi-cloud ready enterprise. And I want to emphasize the term multi-cloud. It's not about public cloud only. It's not about private cloud only. It is not that we prefer at this or that company to run everything uh, on-prem on a non-virtualized environment. I think that although there are some workloads that require that type of environment, the reality is that the overall trend and something a trend that it's here to stay as well is that in the modern enterprise, the infrastructure building needs to be designed to support an environment of multi-cloud, meaning that 2 by 2 of mm, public cloud, private cloud, on-prem, off-prem, and even, as I said before, those environments that are non-virtualized and need to run directly on bare metal. In a nutshell, I guess the key theme here is that we need to make sure that our enterprise is counts with a multi-cloud infrastructure that it's ready to support many different types of workloads and many different types of service providers. And last, and certainly not least, is the essential role that our data center strategy plays for Intel. And when I say data center, really I'm talking about 55 data centers that we have at Intel. And that number used to be actually significantly higher than that. But regardless if we had 2 data centers or 20 data centers or 200 data centers, one of the key things that had enabled us to be successful over the last few years, and in particular, that has been foundational to keep the business running over the last 5, 6 months, is our integrated, cohesive data center strategy. And I cannot stress more the importance of this aspect because this is really the cornerstone uh, upon which all the rest of the building of the company is built. So these two backbones at Intel of our manufacturing muscle and our manufacturing technology in our data center and IT infrastructure is really the two columns on which all the building is uh, is built. So again, LRT can-do mindset, a sound mobile strategy, a robust network, a multi-cloud ready enterprise, and a highly efficient data center strategy. Those 6 items, I would say, among the many other aspects that unquestionably are important to tackle such a complex challenge, probably these six are the ones that I would say uh, require the highest attention, and I would even say that without one of them, it wouldn't be possible to tackle with success this challenge. So let me talk a bit about the leadership team, the what we call the pandemic leadership team. This is again something that started about 15 years ago with the first health crisis that we saw at the beginning of the first decade of the 2000. So on this leadership team, basically the idea is that you basically that the objective of that team, executive team, is number one is to ensure the health and safety of our employees. That's paramount, along with supporting our customers. That's really the reason of existence of this team, is making sure that each and every one of our 110,000, 850,000 employees and associates are safe and are not compromising, then we are not compromising in any way, shape, or form their well-being. That's paramount, and that's our number one goal. Nothing really matters if this topic is being ignored. And this is another item that I cannot stress more, because really, if we are compromising this, nothing else makes sense. And the second one, equally important, is make sure that we are supporting our customers, because it is the whole industry who is depending on our execution. And that's a big responsibility, which of course we take very, very seriously. In order to achieve those objectives, we need to count with the collaboration and active engagement of all these different groups, from human resources to occupational health, to global supply chain, security, legal, etc., etc. So, to make this happen, then it takes three things: a culture of collaboration, a secure, scalable infrastructure, and a team approach. Those three things are absolutely essential to make this happen. Now, let's talk a bit about mobility in the mobile world. This slide tries to depict um, basically three different um, periods of time. Let me say that for those of you who had been um, in the industry for, I would say, more than 10 or 15 years, would remember, maybe 20 years, would remember the gray line, or would identify yourself with the gray thick line that I'm showing here. This used to be the good old times, so to speak, when basically you left home early in the morning, go to the office, start doing your work. Then late afternoon, you start, waiting down, and then you cross the work life, personal life boundary, which was very clearly marked around 3 4 5 p.m., and then you get into private or family mode. Then as mobility starts becoming more streamlined, then we get into this blue line here, that in a way complicated and facilitated, depending on which viewpoint you take, uh, many aspects of our life. In other words, we found ourselves that at different times of the same day, we were interchangeably switching between work related activities and personal related activities. And but again, it reflected that previous trend of a work life and a personal life. Well, as we all know today, the orange dotted line is really what represents, we feel represents better the current situation. In other words, we are always on, always off, depending on which side of the fence you are. The reality is that our lives had become more complicated, and rather than trying to achieve a balance between work life and personal life, what we're seeing is a blending of both aspects of our life. And this brings many other topics that are beyond the scope of this conversation today. This brings its own challenges, but from an organizational perspective, this trend is here to stay. As with pretty much everything else in life, it has its pros, it has its cons. It really depends on how do you make sure that you get the most out of this new scenario in order to have a quality personal private life as well as a productive, fulfilling um, work life. So how do you do, as IT, how do you do to maintain these 150,000 people working under this pattern around the world and ensuring at the same time that you don't have any glitches or downtimes or significant impacts to the business? So this is a challenge that everybody is facing. And for that purpose, and again, as I mentioned at the beginning, you cannot resolve this or be prepared for this overnight. You should have been doing your homework for some time. And we have been trying to do ours for 2 decades actually, when we started aggressively with our mobile journey. And as you can uh, see in this slide, in 1997 was when we really started embracing uh, the laptop at that time. Then in everyone will remember when wireless and Wi-Fi came into the market, and all the Centrino technology that we um, launched back in 2003, 2002, 2003, which was a big success at that time. Finding a hotspot was not that common. Today is common ground everywhere. So we had been on a journey of 2 decades enabling the latest and the greatest and latest technology to make sure that our people have the tools that they need to be successful. In these, you can see here that part of at the center of that journey had been the realization of the importance of having a rich client. By rich client, we mean having an uncompromised PC, whether it is a laptop, an ultrabook, a desktop, a workstation. We want to make sure that we have a client that we put in the hands of our employees the best possible device so that they have they don't have to compromise their productivity, their creativity, just because they have a device that really is not delivering, is not to the mark that's required. I know that there are other options, and we have tested them all. But if one thing we have come up to the conviction is that having a rich client in the hands of our workforce is one of our key advantages, particularly with the heavy uh, resource intensive applications of today, where where your PC is not only executing these applications but normally is running many other processes in the background. And I'm thinking of many information security and agents that need to be put in place in order to maintain the information security standards that we all expect in our organization. Uh, Today at Intel, we do have, as I mentioned, about 200,000 devices, and of those, probably 120,000 PC clients. And although we have multiplicity of brands, form factors, and configurations, we do have standardization in terms of our PC build, in terms of our processes, delivery processes, self-serve processes, monitoring, etc., etc. So when we say that it is important to maintain a standard, uh, in terms of our PC fleet, we are not necessarily meaning that, you know, we all have to have the same exact computer, same exact brand, same exact configuration. It's not really about that. It's really about making sure that you have a professional business grade vPro enabled client. And the reason why I say business grade professional vPro enabled client is because those three things are absolutely essential to maintain, number one, a refresh cycle that is financially sound at the same time that we are not compromising productivity, but also from a technical support point of view. It is important that you have a PC fleet capable of maintaining this level of in and out type of work that we are seeing today in our workforce. Not only we need to be mobile, but that PC also has to enable collaboration. And when we say collaboration, we mean that tool needs to be able to connect the employee, needs to be able to facilitate and have the muscle, the performance to sustain uh, teleconference, virtual meetings, needs to provide the capability to collaborate with other colleagues in the company. And when we say collaborate, we mean uh, co-authoring, participating in social communities, virtual collaboration, IM, voice, synchronous, asynchronous communication. So there is a huge menu of collaboration activities that need to be enabled for us to accept that we indeed are operating in a culture of collaboration. And also, obviously, that that device needs to be at the level of capabilities that the employee can create regardless of the type of work that he or she um, eh, does at the company. So this chart so depicts really the different areas of collaboration that we need to enable in a company. When we say we need to learn to collaborate or we need to implement or adopt collaboration tools at this company, really what we mean is having the tools that will help us connect, collaborate, create, meet, and uh, interact with applications of all kinds in the native mode or the native format of the application. In other words, if a certain application was developed or works on a smartphone, we should be able to work with that application on a smartphone. Or if it was meant for, a laptop, it has to be. So really, the device per se, the hardware per se, should not be a limiter to the productivity and capability of collaboration of our employees. And all of this need to be done in a on a seamless connectivity fashion. What we mean by that is that it has to be a continuum, a compute continuum, meaning that the same workspace that you have in your laptop is the same that you would have in your desktop or in your smartphone. The same applications that you have access in one form factor, you should be able to access in other form factors. You shouldn't have to worry about synchronization or versions synchronizations or where is my data. It really has to be a seamless process where regardless of what kind of device you are using, you always have a workspace environment that follows you across the different devices. All this means that we have to raise the bar in terms of workplace experience in order to be successful to operate in a working remote environment. When I say raise the bar, it's those two aspects that I just mentioned. First, making sure that we have the best possible device, and number two, that we have the best possible collaboration tools, and that those two aspects are integrated in a business process that is seamless for everyone in the company. That means then that uh, we need to focus on performance and productivity and use telemetry to tailor the right device for the employee. There is no one size fits all. Well past are those days where everybody got the exact same machine and everybody, regardless of the type of work they did. Also, we need to have modern applications. We need to broaden the list of applications and services and integrating analytics and AI for people to be productive in their work. Third thing is we need to make sure that we have an integrated range of solutions from large room to PCs, and in our case, with more than 5,000 teleconference rooms at Intel. And finally, we need to, again, make sure that we are taking, getting the most of our social media in terms of amplification of our messages, in terms of internal communication, not only eh, on from the width perspective of the hierarchy, but also vertically. Eh, so in general, what we are seeing is a phenomena that's called or it's being named as the consumerization of IT. In other words, our employees are not willing to accept a, an experience, a PC experience, an IT experience at work that is inferior to the one they already got in their private lives with their own PC and their own smartphones. Should be seamless. And that requires the changing of many mindsets within IT. Picking the best collaboration tool in itself is a serious task, and not every tool is good for everything. So at Intel, we use a good number of different tools. For instance, when we talk about collaboration, we use Skype, we use Microsoft Teams, we use WebEx, we use On24, and really it depends on what is the event um, that we are considering to make sure that we're using the right one. Again, this slide shows some of the characteristics that make one tool uh, have advantages over the other one. Particularly in the case of Microsoft Teams, we use it for this type of conversations, but we also have business Skype. I think that in the case of Microsoft Teams, the capability of having asynchronous content collaboration when that is required makes it a better tool than if you are, for instance, running a large virtual event or even just a business a phone call. That does not require the type of capability. So again, depending on what is exactly the type of collaboration that we need, then we use the right tool. And here are some of the applications or tools that we use at Intel. We One of the things that we have done as a result of the pandemic is push the pedal and really accelerating the deployment of Microsoft 365, and within the suite, probably the six most used applications. We have put priority on the top six applications, meaning Pro Plus, OneDrive, Exchange, Yammer, Teams, and we have accelerated something that originally was expected to be completed by the end of 2020 or well into 2021. It's pretty much completed at Intel at this time. And this is one of those efforts that I said we needed to change and adapt, but that was a decision that we already were on that track. I mentioned that one size does not fit all anymore, and I think that everyone could relate to that fact. At Intel, we basically have done a segmentation of our customer base, and we have a split into different personas. And here you can see some of those personas: the gearhead, the builder, the meeting master, the road warrior, the free dweller, the co-working crew. And these are, catchy names to identify the type of work that gets done by our workforce. And this is relevant because depending on that type of work, then that's the strategy that we follow in terms of the access, tools, applications, security, form factors that get assigned to each of those employees. Also, one of the things that we have done in terms of managing this complex environment of 200,000 devices is making sure that we standardize the PC build. Although we might be using equipment from many different vendors, but we have found that that has paid big in terms of uh, keeping a low cost of maintenance, facilitating managing of upgrades, patches, security, and also it's been essential in order to maintain that abstraction that it's required between the user workspace and the actual hardware that the person is doing, so that both things don't get tight and monolithic, but can actually be abstracted. And when a person needs a new PC, or for some reason gets lost or what have you, that person is able to recover in a matter of hours and recover all that workspace and all that work environment in a matter of hours. So this is something that is absolutely essential as well to maintain a client fleet that is productive. We need to transform the face of IT support. That means that the way we provide service, the way I'm sorry that we provide support whenever problems arrive, and for that, we have a wealth of services that we have enabled at Intel. Let me switch gears a bit into the network and let's go and let's try to give a quick chronology of the things that we went through. So by January 25, 2020, we had about 42,600 people working remotely. And in a matter of 48 days, that number became 142,000. So we basically multiply by 3.5 the number of people working remotely. In March 9, that number jumped to 68,000. And by March 13, we were at 142,000 in 147 sites and in 56 countries. So this massive spike in demand, eh, nobody expected this. And even though we have buffer capacity in the past, in January, let's say, pre-COVID-19, our VPN demand was pretty much at 28,000, and our global capacity was double that, and life was good. Then when we get into the crisis, then we found, as I just mentioned, in a matter of a couple of weeks or months, then that capacity was needed to be multiplied by two, by three, even 3.5, I should say. So that required the purchase of new hardware. But again, purchasing hardware, it not necessarily is a very fast process. So we needed to scale out, we needed to have burst out capacity, and that's when you thank yourself for having invested on a multi-cloud strategy, because that's one thing that actually was a key in being able to provide that service to our employees pretty much overnight. And what we did in a nutshell was those workloads that were very intensive in broadband, like audio, video, we burst them out to our CSPs. We work with many of them, and that helped us and bought us time while we were accelerating in deploying additional capacity in our Skype servers, for instance. Something that we were able to do in a few days, but even few days was not good enough to make sure that we were being able to keep our people connected. You can see here by the March timeframe how these numbers keep growing. And so we continue to build VPN capacity in the public cloud as well as on-prem, as I just mentioned. And then after that, our focus, when we felt that the demand started to stabilize, then the next task or our focus uh, switch to how we can um, improve the load balancing. At the beginning, it didn't really matter if someone in the US that needed to connect went through India VPN to get connected, as long as that person was able to connect. But obviously, that was a suboptimal solution. So once we were able to maintain operations stable, then okay, now how do we do this the right way in terms of load balancing? So that's how we fine tune our ISPs and VPNs in the different geos that we operate. And as you all know, we operate in pretty much every geo in Asia Pacific and in PRC, in the Americas, in Europe, etc. So we made sure that we were doing the right balancing of that capacity. And then, as where we are today, we are at a global capacity of uh, north of 200,000 employees with full regional failover. Again, um, we are probably at double. We have probably doubled the capacity even today when 80 to 90% of our workforce is working remotely. So again, more on this trend. Our primary goals at the beginning was to get our employees connected, balancing our regional capacity, optimization, and achieve full global redundancy. Then we get to a point where our focus shifted to monitoring firewalls, capacity, and fine-tuning our configurations. And then finally, our current focus is on user education of best known practices for working securely over VPN, because this is an aspect that, again, is out of the scope of this conversation. But if there is one a constant concern, and one of the things that are at the top of our radar is maintaining security, privacy, and the integrity of our operations, of our customers' data, of our factories' data, and making sure that we are smart enough to not only contain in the case it happens, but to prevent potential threats to our environment. So multi-cloud, you had heard me mentioning that term already. What does cloud mean for Intel? In a nutshell, it means multi-cloud. It means, if I should use one phrase to explain what does cloud mean to Intel, I would say running the right workload at the right place. And on that, we have to abandon any dogmas from the past. If there is an application that runs better on a public cloud by a third party, let so be it. But if there is a workload that for IP reasons or regulatory or competitive reasons need to be run internally, let's run it internally. It's really about running the workload on the right place, on the place that makes more sense to our customers, in the place that makes more sense from a financial standpoint and from a security and performance standpoint. You cannot do that. You cannot have that type of policy if you don't have a multi-cloud enabled multi-cloud environment. So before and after cloud, in the past or in the early days of cloud, we had been doing cloud for at least 10 years at Intel, probably more time than that. In the early years, really the focus was on infrastructure as a service. But we all know that approach has some limitations, and you quickly realize that there are some other boundaries that you cannot cross, and that's why we are now more in the phase of a sophisticated cloud environment. What do I mean by a sophisticated cloud environment? We mean providing not just infrastructure as a service, but also providing platform as a service, providing software as a service, uh, microservices, containers, all the platform as a service in microservice technology is another mega trend that is disrupting the way we manage our infrastructure even the way that we do business continuity and disaster recovery. Again, this is a topic that is beyond the scope of this conversation, but what I want to stress is that when you open the door of multi-cloud, really the first rooms that you're going to visit in that house is infrastructure as a service, but by no means is the only room. Actually, it's just the beginning of a more sophisticated environment that can enable your company increased levels of flexibility, velocity, and agility, and cost effectiveness that otherwise wouldn't have been possible. Let me try to wrap up over the next 3 minutes, just to mention a couple of things on our data center strategy. At the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned about um, the position that data center has in all this IT strategy. And I'm not exaggerating by saying that it's really the cornerstone of the whole building. Without a sound data center strategy that encompasses the network, the storage, the operating system and management, the servers, the facilities, even the way you design your data center. How do you manage energy? How do you cool your data center to maintain a green uh, a footprint so that you are able to um, uh, deliver the highest possible of computing output at the lowest possible level of energy consumption. One of the numbers and indicators that we are very proud of at Intel is that is our power utilization efficiency index. This is basically an indicator that defines the total consumption of energy of a data center by the consumption of the IT equipment. And the reason why I'm saying we are very proud of this at Intel is because we are running our two most advanced data centers at 1.06 PUE. That means that really we are operating just at a 6% of overhead in those data centers. And this brings immense advantages in terms of cost efficiency and also in terms of how do use resources budget, scarce budget, as I mentioned at the very beginning, that otherwise would have been needed to invest on running those data centers to fund other innovation activities at the company. So data center, in our case, PUE is one indicator. Another key indicator, obviously, is the quality of service. This is another one that we follow very, very, very closely. The third one is our resource utilization, making sure that we are operating above 80% of our resource utilization. In other words, that we are minimizing as much as we can the underutilization of our storage network and computing resources, and of course, the cost per server. The cost per service unit. In the cost per service unit, we calculate that not there's no one cost for every single unit. It really depends on what's your constituency. Meaning, is this capability or is this infrastructure being used for manufacturing, or for office, or for enterprise, or for design? And based on that is how we calculate our cost. Again, all of these things are immensely important and pay big returns in terms of efficiency and overall soundness of the strategy. Uh, just one more slide before I wrap this presentation. This slide shows the number of data centers that we used to have at Intel. In 2003, we had 152 data centers 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago. And today we have 1/3 of that. And this obviously brings uh, immense amounts of cost savings, immense increases in efficiency, in in improvements in how do you manage the operation, and really the secret sauce on how to achieve this, it has to do a lot with uh, implementing what we call extremely high density data centers with deploying other technologies, a custom rack design, a utilization of disaggregated servers, which itself is a fascinating topic because it delivers huge reductions in TCO at your data center. Also, many other different innovations that we have implemented in our data centers that really made them uh, second to none. So with that, I just want to thank for the opportunity to talk to our friends Powerland today, and open the door, leave the door open for any follow up or further conversations that you might want to have with us, and really have the opportunity to dig deeper into this fascinating and um, topic of IT on these times. I cannot believe there has been I've been close to 3 decades in the IT industry, and if there has been a time where it has been absolutely fascinating and absolutely critical for keeping the world running is this time. So again, thank you very much, and look forward to talk to you in the future. Thank you.